Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Yonit Arthur. You are on the Steady Coach, and today's interview is going to blow you away. This is one of my favorite conversations ever. It is amazing, and no introduction is going to do it justice. So I'm going to keep this introduction as short as possible. Lisa Schlosberg is our guest today. Lisa is a licensed master social worker, as well as a holistic coach and a certified personal trainer. But none of those things really do Lisa justice. Honestly, she's really just a force of nature. And Lisa's area of expertise is helping people with diet and weight loss and their relationship with food through a mind-body lens. Today, we are talking about migraine diets, which I know many of you have been prescribed, so to speak. We talk about how to use your relationship with your body to create safety in your nervous system and lead to recovery from chronic symptoms. We talk about how to do weight loss if that's something that you need to or want to work on in a way that promotes safety rather than danger, and so many other topics. It's, again, just an amazing interview. You're going to love it. I can't wait to hear what you think about it. Please, as always, leave comments and questions below if you're watching on YouTube. And if you are listening to this as a podcast, please head over to YouTube. I would love to hear what you think about this episode. I will also link to Lisa's website in the video description and podcast description. She has some services that she can offer if you're interested in working with her. And as always, please like, share, subscribe, follow. All those things help us reach more people. See you in the comments section. Enjoy this conversation. Hi for the second time in like 2 minutes. I already said this offline, but I'm going to say it again for everyone to hear. You and I are like soulmates, whatever. You just don't know it because we don't know each other. This is our first time meeting, but you and I have so many of the same perspectives, and it is just so exciting to have you come on my channel and my podcast to talk about chronic dizziness.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited. And I think anyone, in this field, if you hear what I'm talking about and you really resonate and align with it, it's like, I'm just excited to have this conversation.
I know, right?
I know. See you. Yeah.
I know. Isn't it great when people agree with us? Not to say that we're going to agree on everything, but I think we're going to be sharing a lot of really cool new information from your perspective today too. So Can you give us, just for people who don't know you, which they need to know you. So again, I'm so glad that you're here so they can get to know you. Can you just share your elevator pitch about what you do?
Yeah, of course. Thank you for asking. So it's funny. I wish I had nailed down a really solid elevator pitch. I don't. I never have. What I do is I really support people in healing their relationship with food and eating through healing the relationship they have with themselves. So I take a hybrid mental, emotional, spiritual, social, physiological approach to healing on a deeper level around food and eating. So that could be an emotional eater, a stress eater, a picky eater, someone who struggles with overeating or undereating. It doesn't really matter how it manifests to me. It's really all bringing our attention to a fundamental disconnect between mind and body. So the work that I do is bringing us back home to ourselves so food can be stable and simplified and safe again.
Perfect. Beautiful. I think that was a great elevator pitch, actually.
Thank you.
So when you said that food can be a safe place, that implies to me that food often isn't a safe place. Is that right?
Indeed. Yes.
So let's just jump right into the fire then. So in my world of chronic dizziness, chronic medically unexplained dizziness, many people are given a migraine diagnosis. And they're often the first line of treatment for their migraine diagnoses is often migraine diets or elimination diets. So first of all, I would just like to hear what thoughts you have about that recommendation.
Yeah. So it's very similar to me, actually, to compare putting someone with chronic migraines on a diet and someone who, let's say, is an emotional eater on a diet, right? Is like, either way, we didn't get here because the food and the eating was a problem. So if we just start manipulating the food and the eating, we're still not addressing the root cause. So I'll use myself as an example, right? I'm talking potentially to some people who don't know my story. I was overweight as per the medical model my entire childhood, and I lost 150 pounds in college, which was now 10 years ago. But the reason I'm kind of going there is because throughout my whole childhood, I tried many diets, and I was taken to Weight Watchers, and I saw nutritionists, and I did the whole thing to like try to lose weight. But just like for me, if the problem around food, something I always say is that the biggest problem you have with food is that you're an emotional eater. It's not a problem you have with food. It's a question about how you're coping with your emotions. So my entire childhood was really the illustration of that. Food and eating was like a drug to me, and it helped me kind of stuff everything down. So, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, socially, every time I was uncomfortable, food was a way that I could cope with it. And so, if that's what's going on fundamentally, changing the way that I eat is not going to address the fact that I don't feel safe to feel my feelings. So, a lot of people, the same could be said, right, for chronic pain and chronic migraines, is that if the migraine issue is really coming from the disconnect between mind and body, not feeling safe to think our thoughts and feel our feelings and feel the sensations and the energy moving through the physical self, if that's the root of it, putting someone on a diet is like, it's just not going to get the need met. It's really not going to address what's underneath it. So there has to be, I think, a fundamental understanding of why is someone experiencing chronic migraines to begin with, right? And the same way, why was I over 300 pounds at 17 years old? Not because of what I ate fundamentally, but because of the chronic need that I felt to dissociate from my human experience. And that's where, emotional eating and chronic pain often have a lot to do with each other and overlap in that way. So I'm not really here to like judge or throw shade at the diets, or the doctors who put people on diets. It's really just to say you can do all of that, but there's a lot of reasons it's probably not the long-term solution you're looking for.
Mm, very excellent parallel. I had not even thought about that parallel before you said that, but it's just the same. Like, I guess what a diet is addressing is a biological process. And so what a migraine diet, in the case of a migraine, would be addressing is also a biological process, but neither of those biological processes are necessarily the actual root cause of this problem. They're just,
Right.
I would argue they're symptoms of a problem, not the actual cause
Right.
themselves. Right.
Right.
Okay.
And I think also on that note, the thing about getting prescribed a diet, and again, we could say this for chronic pain, but we could also say this for weight and emotional eating, is that it also becomes a very effective distraction from everything else. Right. So if I'm someone who is an emotional eater, and I am, and I've gained all this weight because food is my primary coping mechanism. Well, if someone comes along and says, put yourself on a diet, now all of my time and energy is going to thinking about and being preoccupied with what I'm eating, how I'm eating, when I'm eating, right? It gets very focused on what's going on in the physical dimension, but it also can be very distracting from what is going on mentally, emotionally, spiritually, socially. What are all the other needs that aren't being met? And so I think that's also what happens with diets is we get very kind of like laser focused on the food and the eating, and it still kind of kicks the can down the road with all of the root issues to begin with. So not only does it not solve the problem, but in some ways, especially when it comes to the work that I do, people struggling with food, it just makes it worse and worse because it's further disconnecting us from ourselves and what we really need on a deeper level. So
Can you say more about that actually? Because I think I know I'm jumping ahead, but I think that right before we got on, one of the things that I said was I feel like, first of all, the evidence for migraine diets is really poor, first of all. But second of all, we can't recommend an intervention and not talk about the potential harms and risks. And diets are seen as such a benign intervention. They're not seen as something that carries risk. So I wonder if you could say more about the risk. Like, what is the
yeah.
risk of prescribing a diet?
Yeah. So it's a great question. And I so appreciate you asking this. So again, like the way my brain works is I perceive all of this through the lens primarily of food, eating, weight gain, emotional eating, all of that. Right. So when we talk about the risks of a diet, there are so many. But primarily, we are at a higher risk for disordered eating and if not eating disorders. And that can be true whether it's, the genesis of it is emotional eating or it becomes trying to get out of chronic pain. It's that hyper fixation on food and eating that can lead to disordered eating later in life. And that's really tricky to get out of, because the way I think about it is I understand a lot of things through the lens of brain science and just neurobiologically what's going on. So here's, to me, the biggest like risk is that what happens is in your conscious brain, right? So we have access to about 5% of what's going on in our brain consciously. The other 95% we don't know is going on. So the reason I say that is because we have an animal brain in there. We're not just like all human consciousness. We have the animal brain that's trying to survive. So when you're given a diet and you're told that certain foods are the problem and other foods are safe, right? Other foods are not going to be the problem. And this could be, again, around weight loss or chronic pain. You're given this dichotomy of like good, bad, right, wrong, eat these, don't eat these. And that's okay. But what's going on a deeper level, probably without any conscious awareness, is that your animal brain turns that into these are safe and these are dangerous. If I go near these foods, my doctor said it's part of the plan, right? You can almost like feel the exhale that happens in your system. Like, this is a safe food for me. And then if you eat the other foods, or you even think about, right? Sometimes you could just think about eating another food and you start to have that like anxiety and fear, maybe guilt and shame. Now you're the cause of the problem you're trying to get out of. There's so many stories that go with it. But what's going on energetically and physiologically, which I think is like the foundation of really what needs our attention, is that certain foods are now associated with danger and threat, right? So chronic pain symptoms we could talk about is really coming from feeling like you're in fight or flight, or being in fight or flight, even though there is no predator right in the room. But that's what a diet ultimately sets up, is that certain foods are maybe, again, in your conscious brain thinking going to cause pain, or maybe they're going to contribute to a migraine, but your brain is trying to avoid that and prevent that so much that your brain is turning that into that food is a predator, that food is life threatening, and it's not. So it's almost like it perpetuates and contributes to the fight or flight that we're trying to get out of, because now the world becomes seen as these are things that are safe, these are things that are dangerous. And you're constantly bracing to either fight, flight, or freeze, right, in response to a predator that isn't actually there. It's the foods that your, doctor or whomever told you to stay away from, but it's causing that whole reaction. So then, right, what is the risk? Well, you're putting yourself in the exact energetic and physiological state that you're trying to get out of. And so that's how it becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Of like, if I eat this thing, I'm going to have pain. Well, a lot of that has to do with the fact that that's the belief, and that's the story, and that's the mindset, and so I think that is, while there are a lot of things I could say about the risks of diets, I think that's the number one thing that needs our attention, because it's very literally adding fuel to the fire that you're also trying to extinguish at the same time.
Mic drop. Yes, I feel like we could just end our conversation right here and just let people just think about what you just said. Oh my gosh. Yes. So much that. So again, I'm just kind of imagining this scenario where someone who was already freaked out, because symptoms like dizziness symptoms are very dysregulating and scary, and they went to the doctor, and the doctor's like, oh, you've got vestibular migraine. You're never going to get better. It's chronic. You're just going to have to manage it. And here's how you manage it: by eliminating bananas and every other food that you've ever enjoyed that, like, again, there's very little scientific evidence to support the idea of eliminating, but neither here nor there. So that person is already freaked out, probably already had a whole bunch of stressors and disconnect that led to the symptoms in the first place. And now we've just made the world even more dangerous. Now we have to worry about banana particles and goodness knows what else. And then, Lisa, I don't know if you noticed this about your people, but in my world, my folks tend to be very detail oriented. And so when the doctor says no banana particles and, whatever it is, they get really fixated on that. So it's not just okay, well, food might be dangerous. It's also, there's like food out to get me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
completely.
then there's this further, they already feel this disconnect and this hatred, sometimes this hostility toward their bodies, because how could my body do this to me? And then this creates even more of a disconnect, because now they can't, as you've mentioned in so much of your work, and I hope to talk about today, they can't heal their relationship with food. They can't use their relationship with food to create safety. And in fact, it's exactly the opposite.
Yes,
Did I capture
exactly.
that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think also, I want to, for a moment, also validate and honor that you might be someone who goes to a doctor and gets a diet plan, and you might experience like, oh, yes, finally, right? Someone is giving me an answer. And not only is someone giving me an answer to what's going on, but they're also giving me a way out. And that can feel so great. That can feel so great. And so even if, you don't want to like follow the diet, and even if, oh my God, you love banana and you want all the banana particles, like there is also, a very valid part of it that's like, it can feel like clarity and predictability, and it can feel like, again, now you're getting a way out of the thing that you're trying to get out of. So I also just want to validate part of the reason, the people that I work with are like, I never want to go on a diet again. Like I hate dieting, and I hate counting calories, and I hate paying attention to what I'm eating, and I never want to do that ever again. And part of the reason that dieting can be so addictive is because we want a feeling of being in control and having predictability and having certainty and knowing what is good, bad, right, wrong, safe, danger. We want the black and white way of doing it, and that makes all the sense in the world. So it's like, it's really valid and very normal if, like, on one hand you're like, I hate this and I don't want to do this, and on the other hand it almost feels like it keeps calling you back. Like, just, every time it gets hard, it's like, just pay attention to the banana particles, like that'll solve the problem. And it's very tempting to believe that and to live that way, because again, it's providing a sense of safety, and it provides a sense of feeling in control, that is very addictive. It's hard to get out of. So I just want to like validate that.
Oh, I'm so glad you said that. Wow. You just nailed it. And it reminds me of stuff like perfectionism or people pleasing or some of these other tendencies people grow up with. Like, it is easier to just be perfect, or to try to be perfect, or to just say yes to everyone, especially if that's always been your fallback and it's kind of worked, even though it kind of hasn't. It's way harder, way scarier to actually rebuild from the bottom up. And so it takes a whole lot of courage for people to listen to us and say, okay, I'm going to have to take the hard road out and actually not focus on avocados and banana particles and all that stuff. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you again so much for bringing up that point, because that is a major factor for my folks too. So I guess that leads me to ask the question then. So if banana particle focus isn't the way out, so what is the way out? How do people do this safety thing in a different way, in a way that's actually sustainable?
Great question. So it's funny, because when I hear you say, like, what is the way out, I have this kind of visual of like, the way out is to come back in. The way out of your pain is to come back in to yourself and your body. So that's what I'm like, I'm a very visual person. That's what I'm seeing, right? Is like, your, let's say, soul is not really like connected to your body. And the way out of your pain is to come back inside and reconnect. So the way that I kind of like, in my elevator pitch mentioned, this has to happen for me on a lot of different levels. So if we look at the human being, at first, like I always say, right, you're a spiritual being having a physical experience with an animal brain in a social context. For my people, take all of that and now apply the fact that you also survive on food. So there's like a lot going on, right?
That sounds really complicated,
right? Like, we think like, oh, I'm a human, like it's simple enough. Like, absolutely not. There's so many different parts of you. So the reason I'm saying that, to kind of set the stage, is because I find mentally, I'll go through each part, but like mentally, emotionally, spiritually, socially, physically, physiologically, environmentally, there's all these different parts of us where we're not living in alignment with our truth. Okay. So what that means is, like, mentally, right? If I'm having thoughts in my head, And I like some of my thoughts are like, ooh, I don't like that thought. Like that's really uncomfortable. God forbid someone finds out what's going through my head, right? It's like we have thoughts. That's in the mental arena or our mindset about things, right? Our perspective, the worldview, the beliefs that we have. So if all these things are coming up, but our reaction to our thoughts are, I can't think that. I can't think that. How dare I think that? Now there's this perception that your thoughts are not safe because you're communicating with your own conscious input towards yourself. I can't think that. So it's kind of like exiling this part of us that is just fundamentally true. And it doesn't mean that you actually believe your thoughts or that your thoughts are reflective of the capital T truth and reality. It just means that you're having a thought because you have a human brain and that's what it's doing. So that's how it can show up mentally. But emotionally, I would say is the biggest thing. We have feelings. We have feelings. And sometimes the reaction that we have toward our own feelings is, I can't feel that. I should not be feeling this. Especially, right? We can look at things like jealousy, anger, rage, shame, the things that are more challenging to sit with, right? So the way that we become in relation to our human experience and our authenticity is no, right? I can't think that. I can't feel that. Let me just push it down. This was my entire childhood. So it was always, I don't want to think about that. I'm not going to. I don't want to feel that. I'm not going to. This is uncomfortable. This makes me feel X, Y, and Z. I'm going to use food to stuff it down and numb myself and dissociate and not feel it. So when we talk about what is the way out, it's like we have to actually come back inside and start telling the truth about who we are, what we think, how we feel, what we need, right? You're talking about people pleasing. A lot of the people in this community that have the TMS personality type, right? But the same is true with my people who struggle around food. It's like we don't set boundaries. We don't feel comfortable saying no. We, avoid conflict at all costs. So when we talk about how do we get out of pain, well, it's not focusing on the pain or the food or the weight. It's about what got you here in the first place. And so for me, again, just using myself as an example, what got me to the weight I was at and the eating habits that I had was I was using food to avoid telling the truth, right? My whole childhood, I really believed I was so strong. And that meant that I was too strong to feel stuff. I thought therapy was a waste of time. I thought emotions were stupid. I was just in complete denial of anything regarding vulnerability or spirituality, right? All of those things were just like, no. So the root of getting to what was going on around food and eating and my weight and my body for me was really about learning how to tell the truth and actually feel my feelings. And that meant first, I just needed a complete paradigm shift and understanding that I had feelings, that I was a vulnerable, sensitive human being, and there was no way out of that. And that life is ultimately largely uncontrollable. There are some things that are going to happen that I can't control. And so, what is it to actually tell the truth about that? Well, it's scary and it's uncomfortable and it's challenging, of course. We need skills and tools and education and support, right? But the root of it, right? When I hear the question, well, how do we get out? It's like, how long you got? Because there are all these different parts that really need to be addressed. But then you can boil it down into very simply, we just have to tell the truth, right? Sometimes you're not okay. Sometimes you do have a feeling about things. Sometimes you do get uncomfortable. Sometimes you want people to stop doing that thing that you've been tolerating for a long time. Ultimately, it's about taking radical responsibility for yourself, and that can happen in all of those different areas. But I think that's really what it comes down to is at the end of the day, it's about embodying authenticity and creating the safety to tell the truth about what you're thinking and feeling and needing and wanting.
And like self mastery, like owning it, like radically owning your stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a question that came up when you were saying all of this. So you mentioned stuffing it down, like numbing, which I think probably people are associating with overeating, for example. But I think we just as often see restriction, right? Or fixation on as additional. Would you think of those also as numbing
Yeah.
strategies as well?
Yeah. So it's a great question, and it's totally valid on both sides of the spectrum, right? That is overeating, undereating. The way that it showed up for me, because I think yes, as an answer to your question, but the way that I think about it in my own experience, because after um, throughout my weight loss and after my weight loss, I found myself in a full blown eating disorder and had no idea what was going on. Like my entire childhood, I was told eat less, exercise more. So I was like, okay, got it. Also, perfectionist, also gold star. Like I will take your advice and I will take it to the extreme. And so I did that. And then at the end of my weight loss, I was starved, malnourished, fatigued, sick, lost my period, hair falling out. I was like the poster child of really malnutrition. And so that was very shocking to me. But in hindsight, what I did psychologically, to answer your question, was I swung the pendulum from one to the other. So on the physical dimension, I went from overeating to undereating. But psychologically, what was going on there was the way that I feel about it is that overeating to me was very numbing and stuffing down, whereas undereating, and not just the undereating, but the hyperfixation and the preoccupation with knowing every single step I took and every calorie that went in and out of my body, that was more distracting. It
Mhm.
didn't feel as it just the energy to it is different to me. That when I was really restrictive and very rigid, I was so calculated about what went in and out of my body that I was too distracted to think about what I was thinking or feel into my feelings or be in my body. It was dissociation in a very different way because
Mhm.
I was just so in my head all the time about everything that I was still out of my body. Whereas before, for me, when I was overeating, I had no awareness at all of what I was eating, when I was eating, how I was eating. I was completely not present in mind or body. So they function very similarly, or they can function for some people very similarly. For me, it felt like it was more numbing to distracting behaviors. But either way, the point is it kept me out of myself. It kept me out of my body and everything else that was going on in my life.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's, as you're speaking, I'm just thinking of all these people listening who have these dizziness disorders and whose doctors are giving them these recommended diets and elimination diets. And I'm thinking, it's just like you're describing, it's just further disconnection from the
Right.
actual problems that are involved in this neural circuit issue.
Right.
So do doctors just not like, do they just have no awareness? Are they just too stuck in a biomedical paradigm to realize this? Like, why is this
Mm,
still happening?
yeah. Oh, you know, I wish I really could answer that question, but that's really what it is. I think about like, I was saying this in my group the other day that when I look back, it's like I do kind of wish that my parents didn't send me to Weight Watchers when I was 9 years old because that had, a lot to do with how I felt in my body and about myself and around food and all of those things. But when I think about it, it's like, well, why did my parents do that? Well, because my pediatrician told them it would be a good idea. Well, why did my pediatrician think it was a good idea? Because that's what he learned in medical school. Well, why did they learn that in medical school? Because the BMI came out a million years ago and we're still going with a really outdated way of approaching food and weight. It's like, yeah, that's usually what it comes down to is it's the way we've always done it. And there's a lot of, I think, fear and resistance to doing something different. Um, and I think more and more with time, thankfully, there are more and more medical providers, et cetera, who are thinking outside of that box, that are not only influenced by the Western medical model, but I think at the end of the day, that's really what it is. It's still coming from like the top down, meaning, if you audit medical school, like they're not talking about this isn't the conversation. It's Western medicine. It's not Eastern medicine. And a lot of and then, this is where I start to sound a little bit like a conspiracy theorist, but it's like, well, why is it? Why is this way? Well, it's a system. A lot of these
And it's
things exist for
simple.
profit. Right.
And
It's,
you when you have
it's
5 minutes with the patient, it's just easier to
right.
say, "Here's the problem, here's the solution," like cause, effect, behavioral, outcome, done. Like
Right.
it's just so, I mean, and in our medical system or in our social system where people, I mean, again, this isn't meant to be social commentary, but I suppose it is. Let's just go with it. But like the whole, not just medical culture, but like Western society in general, where we have this like cause and effect kind of paradigm, like, oh, I have a problem and then I have the solution that I apply to the problem and then it's done.
Right.
This is a lot more like less defined. It's like squishy. It's
Yeah.
squishy. And
Yeah.
that's hard for medical providers, I think. It's easier to just
Completely.
prescribe a diet than to say, huh, I wonder what's going on in this person's life, or
Right.
internal world, right?
Right. And
Yeah.
I also find that, I mean, one of the reasons that I love doing the work that I do, I think is also a reason that a lot of people would hate doing the work that I do. That is, it's different for everyone.
Mhm.
So
Oh,
so there
yes.
is no such thing as I see your problem and this is the solution. And so especially for me, it's like I say sometimes you could have 100 people who are all behaving the same exact way around food for 100 different reasons. And so what that requires for a medical provider, for example, is to really, like you're saying, sit down and listen and like understand what's going on mentally and emotionally for this specific individual, because the next person that walks into your office is going to have a completely different story and the solution therefore is going to be different. So it really requires, having almost like a beginner's mind with every person that you're talking to, rather than being in the seat of I am wearing the white coat and I have the answers and this is true for everyone with this, you know this presentation of it or this manifestation of it. Um, and I see that a lot even with kind of like mainstream eating disorder approaches. Is it it's not individualized enough, in my opinion. But I think again, that's why some people really don't like it. It's like they want to have the answers. They want to be able to say, "I see what you're doing. This is what it means. This is how you feel when you're doing it. This is the thoughts that are driving it." And it's like every single individual is going to have their own story and be different, and I think that's really really important in the recovery process.
Yeah. I mean, and if you zoom out, it's first of all, it's human nature to try to find generalizations, right? And trying to make systems around things. And I think providers, they did get into this because they care about human suffering. And so they see someone suffering and they're like, I want to give you something to do because
Right.
you're suffering. So you can see how everything you described and what I'm saying right now just ends up leading to this outcome where you end up in these dead end diets and nothing changes, but
Yeah.
it's not out of just complete an utter lack of care. It's just misunderstandings combined with the desire to help and lack of time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. So many people, whether they're in my world, whether they're dealing with specific body image related issues, almost all of them have contentious relationships with their bodies. I think that pre-existed in most cases before the symptoms ever started, but especially once symptoms start, they have this really unhealthy relationship with their bodies. So I'm wondering, what can people start to do? You were talking about telling the truth. I'm wondering if you can get specific about some of the things that people might be able to do to start repairing this relationship with their bodies.
Great question. So there's a few things. The first is I think we need collectively, we need to embrace a paradigm shift about what the body is. And so I'll start there, because if we are carrying the messages and narrative of the culture, or maybe our family of origin, or whoever raised us, and the world at large about what your body is, there's something really fundamentally not serving us about that. And so, again, if we go back to redefining the human experience, what
Oh,
are you, right?
nothing major,
Like
just redefining the entire human experience.
very classic Schlosberg. But if we look at because again, we can't, as I'm always saying, like Albert Einstein quote about we can't solve a problem on the same level of consciousness that created it, right? And so if you're over here asking about like, how do I heal my relationship with my body? Well, if you don't first understand the consciousness through which you are looking at your body and perceiving and understanding what your body even is, like we can't get very far. So I'm going like all the way. I have a thing for root causes. Okay. So like going all the way into like, okay, before we talk about healing your relationship with your body, what is even your understanding of your body? And like, what does your body mean to you? Because if we don't start there, how can you find a solution? Right. So I'm saying that because you're a spiritual being having a physical experience with an animal brain in a social context. So, what is your body? What actually is your body, right? Well, your body is your home. Your body is where you live. You're a spiritual being. So, you can come at this from a very spiritual perspective, or you can come at this from a strictly scientific perspective. It actually doesn't matter because they're both saying the same thing. You're a system of energy, right? So, like the electricity that makes your nervous system work, the connection between your mind and body, it's electricity, right? It's energy. So you're a spiritual being. You, right? The essence and the soul and the spirit of you, your energetic blueprint, I can't even touch. I can't see. I can't track or measure or weigh, right? What you are. Okay. So there is a fundamental difference between who you are, what you are, and your body. Your body is your home. This is what allows, this is a vessel that allows you to live a human life. So the reason that you can feel joy and pain and fear and connection and love, the reason that you can get up out of bed every day and drive your car and do the things that you want to do with your life, it's because you're living in a physical form, right? Without your human body, you wouldn't be able to like taste the food that you're eating. You would just be energy. Okay. So from that place, how do we heal the relationship we have with our body? Well, you first have to understand that you're living in it. You have to understand that you have a body, you are a soul. It's not the other way around. A lot of us live with this perception that we are a body, but we have a soul. And so we want to talk about why we don't have a healthy relationship with our bodies. Well, because you're not even really clear on what it is, right? You're defining yourself by your body. And the reason that this fundamentally matters so much is because if you are objectifying yourself by your body, identifying yourself by your body, now all of a sudden the weight, shape, size of your physical appearance or form is so deeply connected to your identity that when things start to shift, either you gain weight or you lose weight or things start to change, right, in your body, it
You get
becomes
migraines
right.
or
Anything that's going
dizziness.
on in your
Yep.
physical experience starts to become like an identity thing and really ultimately a threat to your identity, which can feel like a threat to your life. So now we're just bringing in like the brain science of all of it. That is, if you're moving through the world with the interpretation that you are your body rather than you live inside your body, now there are predators or perceived predators every time something in your body starts to shift. Right. So I was talking about this again in my group last night. We were having a conversation where, to me, I don't care very much about if you like what your body looks like or if you love your body. I am much more preoccupied with, can you treat yourself with love regardless of how you feel about your body? Can you be embodied in the understanding that there is a difference between your body and yourself, and that you are worthy of and deserving of love and empathy and compassion and flexibility and all connection, belonging, right? Regardless of what's going on in your body or your perception of how you look or any of those things. There is to me, right? So that's how we start to heal the relationship we have with our body, is you start to treat yourself the way that you want and deserve and are worthy of being treated, regardless of what's going on in your body. Because very often, again, in my world, it's like when we lose weight and we're thin, we are very nice to ourselves. And then when we gain weight and we're in a bigger body, now we're being really critical and judgmental and mean and shaming, right? So that's how we end up perpetuating thin is safe and fat is dangerous. Not because it's factually true for many of us, but because we're treating ourselves that way, and our brain is going to use our conscious input to learn how to exist in this world. So healing the relationship with our body really, to me, becomes, can you treat yourself with love regardless of what's going on in your body? And can you remember that your body is your home? Your body is an instrument, it's not an ornament. It is here to carry you through a human life. And very often, when you have those reminders, and you just get to shift into a completely new paradigm. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, my body is my home. I am worthy of being treated with love. And whatever's going on in the physical dimension is not going to take those things away from me. It really brings the charge down a bit.
Yes. 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 I think what I'm about to say is kind of distilling the things that you just said into like only a piece of what you said, but I want to frame it this way for people who may not have been exposed to your viewpoint yet. I talk about this in the context of shame. So like, people with chronic dizziness often spend most of the time, they'll feel despair over the symptoms, but then the despair, fear, whatever is amplified 1,000 times by the shame that they feel because I can't do the thing that I was supposed to do. I'm a bad parent. I'm a bad husband. I'm a bad wife. I'm a bad worker. I'm not worth anything. And that's actually the danger signal. Like the symptoms themselves, not to say we shouldn't learn how to react to them differently. That's part of this too. But it's the shaming that happens at the same time that really just knocks those alarm bells way up. And that's what ends up keeping symptoms going for many people. So then I have a question. So people listening to this are going to hear what you said and they're going to be like, wow, that's amazing. But then what's going to motivate me then to make changes to my body or make changes to maybe lifestyle things that might help me with my dizziness if I'm just perfectly happy being lazy and just doing nothing because everything's fine right now. So I know you probably get this question, right? So tell me how that works. Like how do people, if they accept themselves and love themselves unconditionally, how do we then motivate ourselves to do things that actually we need to do?
Mm-hmm. Great question. Yes, I hear this very often. So, okay, I am having a lot of thoughts because this is one where it's like literally how deep do we want to go? Because I think it starts with our brains again feel very largely safe and comfortable with things being black or white. And it's either this or that, right? And so the way that trickles into this conversation is there's this belief that we hold, whether it's consciously or not, that I can either be in acceptance of where I am or working to make things different. It's either this or that I'm either fully in acceptance or I'm trying to make things different. And what I'm saying to you is it doesn't need to be that way. You can have both at the same time. The same is true with me and my people. There is a lot of the belief in this culture, especially these days, that you are either in acceptance of your body and your weight as it is, or you're trying to do something about it. And you can't have both at the same time. You cannot possibly be in acceptance of where you are and want it to be different. And I think that is a limiting belief. And I don't think it's true at all. I think that we struggle with nuanced ways of thinking. And so, like, fundamentally, that's how I see this. There's a misunderstanding about what is even possible. Can you have both at the same time? And sometimes I am just the person that comes along and says, here's your permission slip to have both at the same time. You can be accepting of where you are. So we have to define a few things. We have to define what acceptance is. Okay, a radical acceptance is, right, transformation begins with a radical acceptance of what is. That's Danielle Laporte's, quote, right? We talk about that a lot.
Yes.
So transformation begins with a radical acceptance of what is. So I have to clarify with people constantly, what does acceptance mean? And like, how do we actually do it? Because I think conceptually it's like great, but also how do you actually do it? And so here's some things about acceptance. Acceptance does not mean that you like it. Acceptance does not mean that you want it. Acceptance does not mean that you would like it to be this way. Acceptance doesn't mean that you're comfortable. Acceptance does not mean that you are looking at your present reality being like, this is what I want. That's not acceptance. What acceptance is no longer fighting it. It's no longer being in resistance to it. So radical acceptance is to say, I have migraines. I am obese. Whatever it is, that's true for you. So instead of, right, and you can start to feel like in your body, right? If the reaction is I have migraines and the energy around it is like, no, how do I get out of this? I hate this. I don't want this to be true anymore. Like all of the things, right? That's not the energy of acceptance. That is fighting it and resisting it, trying to control it, trying to manage it, trying to change it, right? So in a way that shows up very acutely, let's say you start, like a migraine starts coming on, right? And like immediately it probably turns into, how do I stop this? What did I do to create this? This is going to go on forever. Then I won't be able to do this, this, and this, and this, and this. And it's going to take away my whole life. And that's not acceptance of what is, right? So when acceptance comes up, it's an opportunity to say, this is my reality right now. And it doesn't mean that you like it. And it doesn't mean that you want it. It just means that you're saying, this is the truth of what is in this moment right now. And that's what acceptance is. So now we can talk about you're in acceptance of what is, which you need in order for your brain to feel safe. Okay. Like that's not like, we can't skip over acceptance. The brain needs to know that you're safe right now. If you're listening to this, number one thing I will have you walk away with is the mantra that has served me so much and hundreds of my clients at this point. You are uncomfortable. You are not unsafe. You are uncomfortable. You are not unsafe. So this needs to happen as part of acceptance, because if you're fighting every symptom you have, you're fighting your headaches, you're fighting your migraines, you're fighting your body, you're fighting your weight. If you are in constant resistance of your reality, your brain thinks that you're unsafe because you're fighting it and trying to get out of it. It thinks your reality is a predator. So something that helps me there is to say, I'm not unsafe. I'm just very uncomfortable. I'm uncomfortable with a migraine. I'm uncomfortable with IBS symptoms. I'm uncomfortable at this size in my body. I'm uncomfortable, but it doesn't mean it's a saber-tooth tiger that I'm going to literally die. And that's a big shift for your brain, who's interpreting all of this as life or death, whether you know it or not. So that's acceptance. Okay, now we can talk about, once you're embodied in acceptance, this is my reality right now in this moment. I don't love it. I'm uncomfortable about it. I would like it to change, but I understand this is my reality. Okay, now we can talk about, well, then how do you motivate yourself to do something different? So this leads into a conversation for me about, there's a misunderstanding about motivation and inspiration. And the misunderstanding runs deep for a lot of us. That is, in order to be inspired to do something different, you have to be bullying yourself, shaming yourself, and coming from a place of judgment and fear and inadequacy. You might have found in your own lived experience that that doesn't work very well. It does work in the short term, perhaps. You can like white knuckle your way into doing something or force your way into doing something. Use your willpower. Willpower is a real thing. It's just not something that is sustainable. And so you can get yourself to do stuff for a short period of time, because you can run from a predator for a short period of time, but you can't run from a predator all day, every day, right? At a certain point, you're going to need to stop. So the first misunderstanding is that we need to be bullying and shaming ourselves into behavior change. It only works short term. So now we can have a conversation about, how do we actually do something different? And for that, I will call upon Kristen Neff. Do you know Kristen Neff?
Sure, absolutely.
The queen of self-compassion. The way that I talk about really motivating and inspiring yourself to do something different is through the lens of fierce self-compassion. Okay. So there's tender self-compassion and fierce self-compassion. Tender self-compassion is accepting ourselves to alleviate suffering. These are the things like, ooh, this is a moment of suffering. This is uncomfortable. I can stay present with myself and accept the hard things that happen in my life. That's tender self-compassion. But then there's also fierce self-compassion. And I've just gotten so obsessed with teaching this because I think it is so everything, the answer to this question. Fierce self-compassion is about not allowing other people or yourselves to continue doing harm to yourself. So if you have a behavior, and that could be around food and eating, but it could be around anything else, right? People pleasing, perfectionism. You have some sort of behavior that is causing your own pain and discomfort and harm. It would be compassionate for you to change the behavior. So how do you inspire yourself to do something different is to really look at, this thing that I'm doing, this behavior that I'm engaging in, is actually the genesis of so much of my own discomfort. And coming from the place of, I love myself enough to do something about it. I am worthy of living a more peaceful, fulfilling, stable life, that I'm going to change this thing. And so it cannot sustainably come from, I'm inadequate, I'm not good enough, right? All the judgment and shame. It actually has to be rooted in love, empathy, compassion for the self. And when you love yourself and you're coming from a place of, I love myself, so I want to do differently, right? I use the example because we can probably all relate to, you failed a test at school and you have to take responsibility for why did that happen? Well, because instead of studying for your test, you went out with your friends. And like, that's totally okay. It doesn't mean anything about you, right? We're not judging, we're not shaming. But in order for you to pass the test next time, you have to choose to do something different. And not because you suck, and not because we hate you, and not because judgment or shame, but because something's got to be different if you want to pass the test. It's really about aligning with you being on your own team. And so you're coming from an energy of acceptance and love. And that's where the inspiration really has to come from, is that it's not, ultimately at the end of the day, it's not compassionate for you to look at something you're doing that's causing your pain and discomfort and continue doing it, or not, or, you know, not set the intention to even look at it, right? Acceptance, and this is another thing that comes up in my work all the time, acceptance is not resignation, right? If you're in a behavior that is causing you pain and suffering, and you resign and say, well, you know, it, that's not compassionate, because you're continuing and perpetuating your own pain and discomfort. So that's the lens that I see it through, is you can have acceptance and set the intention to do something different at the same time. And also, if your intention is to do something different, it really is coming from a place of fear, self-compassion. And it's a very long-winded answer to your question, but that's how I see it.
Perfect. Beautiful. I'm so glad that you went into the detail that you just did, because you've already answered the next question that I was going to ask, which was, okay, so let's just say someone says, all right, in order to recover, I know there are some changes I need to make. Maybe for someone that does involve some kind of physical change. I just want people to get strong and exercise because it's good to feel empowered in your body. But for some people, I think getting moving is a necessary part of recovering from chronic dizziness, and getting your heart rate up and doing hard things actually is a part of chronic dizziness recovery. Or for some people, it may be honestly looking and saying, I've got to support myself through good nutrition. That has got to be a part of this process. Things I don't talk about as much on my channel because I'm always talking about feelings, but for this is not that you don't just have a mind, you also do have a body, right? So it sounds like if people want to do those things and make the decision to do those things, if they come from a place of radical acceptance first, and then have fierce compassion and say, I'm not going to let myself harm myself with being, not supporting myself with good nutrition. If they're looking at it from that perspective, that is a safety message. That is a safety message, even though they might be doing some of the same things that someone who didn't have this attitude might be doing, right? So the outside stressors might be exactly the same.
Yes. So this is it's a really great point. And this, to me, in the 8th module of my program, I have a Venn diagram. Okay. And it's the weight and health Venn diagram. So the point there is that at a certain point in my life, what was healthy when I was 300 pounds suddenly became unhealthy after I lost all that weight. And so it was really figuring out exactly what you're saying that I love to teach also. It's not about what you're doing, it's about the energy with which you're doing it. And the energy with which you're doing it is always the most important and most powerful thing, because our behaviors, our actions speak louder than words is something that we're all familiar with. But our energy speaks louder than our actions. And especially when we're working with the internal system, your system of energy. So the reason I'm saying all of that is because that's exactly the point. In the middle of my Venn diagram, we have things like salad and cardio, right? Exactly what you're saying. So if you come to a salad and what's going on in your head is, I have to eat this, I should eat this, I'm supposed to eat this, I'm bad if I don't eat this.
If I don't eat this, I'm going to get dizziness.
Right, exactly. Like all of the kind of fear messaging, and that could be from judgment, shame, inadequacy, failure, whatever the story is around it. If that's the energy with which you're eating the salad, it's kind of like, again, you're putting yourself in a position to feel like you're running from a predator. Now, if you drop all of that, right, like shake the Etch-a-Sketch, leave that behind. Now you're showing up to a salad. And the reason that you're eating a salad or choosing is because you know to your point, you can support yourself with nutrition. This is a really good way to get in the micronutrients that you are not going to get elsewhere, that your body survives off of things like fruits and vegetables that come from the earth. And it's really supportive for you to add that into your daily diet, let's say. If the reason that you're eating a salad is because you're doing yourself a favor and you're helping yourself, then the energy around it is totally different. But the point here is that either way, the bowl of vegetables is a bowl of vegetables. Nothing actually changed in the physical dimension about the salad itself. Everything is different about what's going on mentally and emotionally and energetically, which means your experience of it is going to be entirely different. So that's exactly the point, is that when I work with people and, you know, they've been in a similar place of like, well, I don't want to go on a diet, so like I don't pay any attention to what I eat because that, you know, and it's like, I don't want to perpetuate diet culture, so I'm not being mindful of what I'm putting in my body. And I so get that, because that's what we do. We go from one end of the pendulum to the other, right? We swing it. But at the same time, then the way that I think about it is like, well, then who's taking care of you, right? At the end of the day, if you're not the one paying attention, it becomes just another form of self-neglect. Ultimately, it's like you're abandoning yourself because no one can feed you but you. No one can have this experience but you. So all of it, again, comes down to, it's not about what you're doing. It's about the energy with which you're doing it. And a lot of those things, right? When I start supporting people with being mindful of what they're eating again, there's a lot of this fear of like, but this is what I did when I was on a diet, and I don't want to go back there, right? The brain is trying to protect you from something that was harmful and abusive, which is brilliant. But it's really, that's why at a certain point, the conversation has to just get deeper into really energetics rather than what you're doing in the physical dimension. And so it's, you know, it's everything that you're saying, but absolutely, yes, 100%.
Yeah. Well, it just, if we bring it back to this simple idea of being put on a migraine diet, like there's danger written all over that entire statement that I just made.
Yeah.
Like the way that you cannot interpret what I just said in any kind of safe way. But if you were to say, you know, I really feel like I want to support my body through eating more whole foods, I feel like my body might work better in that situation, and it might be more likely to cope with stress better if I'm in that position. You might end up following many of the same guidelines and eating cleanly. Right. I'm sure that's a term you hate, right. But you may end up doing that. And it will be it does not feed the neural circuit dizziness. It is actually taking away from the neural circuit dizziness. It is creating safety. It's not creating danger. Yeah. So, wow. Brilliant. So I would love it if you could share just where people can find you, what kinds of programs you offer, all that stuff.
Yeah. So the best place to find me is probably Instagram, lisa.schlossberg. You can always email me, lisaschlossberg@gmail.com. And then the real offer for my entire business right now is a group coaching program. So it's a 14-week program. It is 12 modules. It is basically everything that I know and everything that I have to offer is packed into these 12 modules. Very psychoeducational about, really, I always say it's like, how did we get here with our relationship with food that's not working? How do we get out and how do we maintain it? So it's really, you know, as you can probably hear, a deep dive into mental, emotional, spiritual, social, really addressing on a deep level what the root causes are, so you can come back into your body and feel safe and eat food and have a more peaceful and fulfilling time here on earth in your body. So that's what I have to offer. I probably, by the time you release this, will be enrolling for the next round of that. So feel free, anyone, you know, apply on my website, email me, DM me on Instagram, however you like to get in touch, I'm here. And then lastly is the Out of the Cave podcast. So if you want to hear more about my story, how I work with people, client interviews, the science behind what's going on in your relationship with food, everything. There are over 100 episodes now of the Out of the Cave podcast with Lisa Schlosberg. So I will point you there.
Oh yeah. And I will link to everything. I am myself a listener of your podcast. That's how I know about you. And I told you in our correspondence, I was like, I finally reached the point where my audience is big enough that I have the courage to ask you to talk to you. because I feel like kind of a fangirl, to be honest. So yeah, so totally recommend all your resources. And again, I'll link to everything below. So it's easy. Just click
Thank
on one of
you.
those links. Okay, beautiful. So thank you again, Lisa. This was just so awesome. Thank you so much. I feel like we could probably talk for another 3 hours about
Yeah,
this, but I think we've given people so much to think about. So again, thank you so, so much for taking the time. It's been just an awesome conversation.
of course. Thank you for
Yeah.
having me.
Awesome. And so the rest of you, I know you enjoyed this as much as I did. So looking forward to your questions and comments. If you're on YouTube, drop them below. If you're listening to this as a podcast, please head over to YouTube to drop me comments and questions. I love hearing from you. And let me know what your thoughts are. Let me know what other topics you want me to talk about. Like, share, subscribe, follow the podcast. All that stuff helps me reach more people. And thank you guys so much for sticking with us. All right. We'll talk to you soon. Take care, everyone.